Hi everyone, Kelly here. Wanted to bring a special lesson plan to all of you today to talk a little bit about Malcolm X rhetoric and the speech, the ballot, or the bullet that has been provided in your readings. So I'll begin by giving a brief overview of Malcolm X's life. Then we will talk a little bit about the context, the socio-political context, which was swirling around when he gave this speech, as well as his subsequent assassination. And then I'm going to talk about rhetorical analysis and how you might use this specific piece as a foundation for either an academic analysis essay, rhetorical analysis essay, or even something possibly creative. So we've got this quote here: I'm for truth, no matter who tells it. I'm for justice, no matter who it's for or against. And this is something that I think Malcolm X really stood for. And it is something that makes him, to me, certainly an American hero to remember. So let's begin with the beginning of his life. He was born on May 19th, 1925, in Omaha, Nebraska. Didn't spend a lot of time in Nebraska, kind of bounced around actually between Detroit and Baltimore and Harlem and New York quite a bit. His father died young. He kind of also bounced around with his siblings. He dropped out of school in the eighth grade, which would have been in 1938, so just before World War II. And at the time, he showed all of this academic promise, and he wanted to be a lawyer. And, he kind of knew he had the gift of gab a little bit. And his teacher said he would never amount to anything and that he should just give up on his dreams because he would never make anything of himself. So he walked away from school right then and there, which, according to his autobiography, was easy because he looked like an adult. And so he was basically able to walk out of the eighth grade and into employment. And he went back and forth between gainful employment and criminal employment over the next few years. He discovered his love of music, his love of dancing, and his love of drugs and women, and so many things that he would later come to regret. But as he discusses in his autobiography, which I strongly recommend to anyone who has not read it, he engaged in all sorts of kind of unsavory activities, and he credits his time in prison as the thing that changed his life around. So Malcolm X gets caught on a breaking and entering, and he goes to prison, and he completely changes his life around. The first way that he changes his life around, I want to talk a little bit about education, and this is kind of what endears him to me, is he knew that he wanted his voice to mean something, which was, his original goals to be a lawyer. He knew that what he had to say was important, and he knew that he did not have the skills that he needed to say and do what he needed to say and do. And I think that would resonate for so many of you. It certainly resonates for me that the thing we want to say is so difficult to say it exactly right, especially live, and to a live audience. So he sets out on this journey to learn everything that he can learn. The man literally writes the dictionary word for word, pencil and paper, like old school number two pencil and paper, hand wrote the entire dictionary from start to finish because he wanted to find the words that had escaped him for so long. So he goes out and he finds the words. And he also finds in prison religion, and he's got a 10-year sentence, so he's got a quite a long stint. He finds religion, and in finding religion, he finds the Nation of Islam. So the Nation of Islam is a branch of Islam. Many people, when they think about Islam, they often think of Shiite or Sunni Islam, someone who's kind of from the Middle East, where the Prophet Muhammad would have been from. But Malcolm X is from the Nation of Islam, which is, I guess, more of kind of like an American version of Islam, and it's particularly adopted by Black Americans at this time for many, many, many reasons, some of which are in our speech that we might think about. But he soon attracts the attention of the kind of leader of the Nation of Islam. And the Prophet Elijah Muhammad adopts Malcolm X kind of as a project, as a surrogate son, as a mentee, takes him under his wing, visits him in prison, and says, when you get out, you're going to come to Chicago. You're going to start a temple for me. I'm going to look out for you. So Malcolm X finds this kind of father figure in Elijah Muhammad, who is going to help purify the world. The Nation of Islam is an organization that's led by discipline, prayer, cleanliness. They're a very devout group, and Malcolm X listens to all of this, and he is all on board. So he is getting educated, he is getting his religion, and when he gets out of prison, he's ready to go to that kind of next level. But according to Elijah Muhammad, he's not really there, and the church has not grown that much. So he actually comes to Detroit, and he works at this mattress company or mattress business in the city, and talks about how he sees the owners ripping off the people in his community, and it makes him angry, that they're selling the mattresses for a lower price to one community and a higher price to the other. And he sees people who are not living by the discipline and the cleanliness that he now abides by, and that's very difficult for him. He opens a temple, and he starts to immediately attract a following, not just locally at the religious level, but nationally and then internationally. And it seems as though Malcolm X's star is rising. He is getting attention, and he, of course, has a message to spread, which we'll talk about in a moment when we look at the speech. So he has his mentor, Elijah Muhammad. Things are going smoothly. He gets married. He takes a wife. He starts having children, and the more he succeeds, the more Elijah Muhammad begins to resent him, which would be okay, according to the autobiography, except for the fact that Elijah Muhammad was having extramarital affairs and abusing his position of power, according to all the gossip and the autobiography. So his mentor, the man who kind of gave him his religion and his calling, and made him kind of what he is, and Malcolm X always spoke very well about him, always. You could see even in the speech, he mentions him positively. Is not a good person, or so it seems. He gets meaner. The gossip about the affairs starts to spread. He stops leaving the house. It becomes a whole thing. And Malcolm X starts to realize that maybe he doesn't want to be in this organization. Now let's talk a little bit about racism and ethnicity here. Many of us know the classic school narrative. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King was a good man because he preached nonviolence, and he didn't believe in violence, and he never believed in extremes, and he was just a good guy, right? And Malcolm X was violent and angry and believed in any means necessary. He was the bad one, and we liked the good one for only singing and protesting, and we don't like the bad one because he called attention to specific issues that I guess the messaging was not polite. I don't know how I want to put it exactly, but the traditional narrative is that Malcolm X is this kind of angry by any means necessary. Well, he's angry, darn right. He is disciplined, and his leader takes this incredible fall from grace. Now Malcolm X is starting to question everything, including his own kind of racism. Malcolm X is racist against white people because white people are racist against Malcolm X, et cetera, right? And then the trip that changed his whole world around happened. This is like 1963. He goes on the Hajj, he goes to Mecca, which, thinking about the fact that there's Nation of Islam is kind of like an American Islam, and then there's like the Shia Sunni Islam in the Middle East, and there are other organizations too, but these are kind of our dominant ones in this conversation today. He goes on the pilgrimage, he goes on the Hajj, he goes to Mecca. And at this time, he's gotten some international reclaim and some notice, and he's done speaking engagements all around the country and internationally as well. And everything changes on this trip, because before he left Detroit, Harlem, and Baltimore, he experienced racism as an American. And when he went on this trip, he was treated as an equal. The red carpets were rolled out, the finest of food, of rooms, of accommodations. They hustled him here and there, and they treated him like an equal, like a prince. And so when he goes on this trip and he goes outside of the kind of American sphere of racism, racism exists all over the world, folks, in many, many different forms, of course. He realized that he had been operating his entire life under this cognitive dissonance because he had seen black and white his whole life, but he had only seen it through the eyes of him as an American. And this trip just made him see the whole world in a totally different way. So he comes home from this trip and he says, Nation of Islam, this ain't it. This is led by a philanderer. This is preaching something I no longer believe in. And so he broke from the Nation of Islam. Now, this was a really big deal when he broke from the Nation of Islam. And I have this little timeline here. So right here after Mecca, right, is where we're getting to the end of the timeline. Right here after Mecca is his assassination. He broke from the Nation of Islam, and a hit was put out for his life. Now, we think, and this is pure speculation based on some historical records and blah, blah, blah. We think that the CIA probably killed Reverend King. But we think, and there's a lot of evidence to this, including, of course, in Malcolm X's own autobiography, though there's some grave things about the case. We think that he was assassinated by the Nation of Islam, and that Elijah Muhammad himself put out the hit. So he grows up poor, goes to Harlem, learns about music and crime and drugs, goes to prison, converts to the Nation of Islam, leaves prison, begins a ministry, grows his impact. He then has issues with Elijah Muhammad, who suspends his ministry. He goes to Mecca, breaks with the nation. Very quickly after that, he's assassinated. Now, the speech that I have given all of you was delivered in Detroit, Michigan, which was, this is a month, less than a month after his break with the Nation of Islam. So he breaks with them. A month later, he gives this speech. And within a year, in February of 1965, he is dead. So what's interesting about this specific speech, not only do I love that it's given in Detroit, or some hometown love, but this comes from this very incredible and unique time in his career where kind of everything had changed. One of the reasons why I really look up to Malcolm X, and I would say that Abraham Lincoln and Ben Franklin, there's a few others that I really look to as kind of genuine American heroes, is because they would all tell you, look, I messed up. Here's where I messed up. Here's where I messed up. Here's where I messed up. I was wrong about this and this and this and this, but I think maybe this. So now I'm going in that direction. For me, folks, I want a hero who is willing to say, I messed up. I was wrong. Now I'm going in this other direction because I think that's the way. And I'm just going to go and hope for the best. I think that it's so powerful to be vulnerable and to show people the kind of darker parts of our journeys. I think it's just so difficult to do. So I am a huge fan of Malcolm X, and especially this speech and how it looks in this very unique moment in this great man's life, and shows us how to appeal to audience, how to use rhetoric to make an impact, and also speechcraft. So I want to talk rhetorical analysis here. Maybe that's kind of where we're all going. I love the backstory. I love the story of his life, if you can't tell. I have given you the link to this version of the YouTube video. I strongly recommend this one. It has little annotations and subtitles at the bottom, so it gives little notes as you watch. The thing about this, and we don't have video footage of this speech, but there is an audio recording, which we have. It's 52 minutes and 46 seconds long here. You can hear the audience's nervous laughter when he calls them out for possibly being mad at him for being hostile. He says, I think we have some hostile members in the audience. And they laugh because they know the joke, but also because maybe they are actually hostile, or like they've heard some bad things and that he's no longer loyal. And so maybe they're feeling like they're going to ice him out. This speech is given to a bunch of people who, if they're not just skeptical of this man, they hate him. Maybe there's a friendly audience here, but they are skeptical, and and some of them are actually out to get him. In fact, his assassination was not the first attempt. There was an attempt before the successful assassination. So, I like this comment. Nothing has changed. I want to talk about that. So I do recommend that you maybe listen to it and read along with it. I do think that the annotations are really great. I have also given you this PDF copy, and I want to talk a little bit about strategy if you're reading this for analysis or for rhetoric. It's possible that maybe you want to add some comments here. So like this is the thing that I was saying. I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we had an audience this large and didn't realize that there were some enemies present. That to me, I can highlight it. I can maybe add a little comment there that says, this is an example of pathos. He's kind of doing like a mind trick on us a little bit to just he has to acknowledge it. He has to acknowledge that there are people who are mad at him. And I think that's some of the real beauty of this speechcraft is that he steps in with ethos for days. Mr. Moderator, Reverend Klieg, Brother Lomax, brothers and sisters, some friends, some enemies. He starts off by acknowledging the people in the room. That adds that layer of ethos. He then goes on to say that religion should not divide people and that no matter a person's religion, it should not detract from the present statement. So whether someone is a Christian or a member of Islam or whatever it may be, he says, let's put religion away for now and let's focus on the real issue at hand, which is this kind of this philosophy of Black nationalism, which is to say putting the Black community, putting the Black community first. Instead of spending one's money outside of the community, spend the money in the community. Instead of voting for someone who is just pandering and who never actually helps the community, go out and run for office or go take charge. There's a lot of content in this speech, right? There's like 9 pages. There's a ton of pathos, logos, and ethos. And let me go ahead and put a little key on the screen for us just so that we can see. Pathos is emotion. And we've been talking about this, so hopefully we're feeling pretty good about it. And ethos. So if we're talking about doing a rhetorical analysis, which is what I think some of you may choose to do for your optional assignment for your student's choice. One thing that you might want to do, if it's me, I'm actually going to print this out on paper. And if you are really invested in the speech and in the process, take 3 different colored highlighters. Maybe pink for pathos, orange for logos, and yellow for ethos, whatever it may be. And anytime that you see pathos, which is anything that's going to like stir you up, anything that gets you hot and angry, anything that makes you feel some kind of way, I think that there's some pathos built into this as well as ethos. So sometimes you'll have some crossover. But if you read your document and code it by highlighting, okay, when I see we mention Mr. Muhammad here, we are utilizing ethos. And so I'm going to highlight that in the yellow color. If you scroll through here and just go ahead and highlight the specific types of evidence, pathos, logos, or ethos in different colors, then you can use those to possibly start building an essay. You could build that essay by saying, in Malcolm X's 1964 speech, The Ballot or the Bullet, Malcolm X utilizes pathos, logos, and ethos to convey a message of Black nationalism. Then 1 paragraph on pathos, 1 paragraph on logos, 1 paragraph on ethos, 1 conclusion, and you've got yourself an essay. I'm actually going to kind of help start one up for you guys real quick. If you want to talk more about this speech, I would absolutely love to do that at any time. Or if you would maybe be interested in starting up a discussion forum about it, that would be fun. So I have my APA template. I'm just going to start my document from this. You guys know I like my APA instead of my MLA. Of course, I could use MLA, but it's a little bit more complicated to use, and I like my APA. Only English majors need MLA. Okay, so I'm going to put my essay title in bold, uppercase, and lowercase. So this is going to be a rhetorical analysis of and I'm going to put my name here. Let's see, Jane Doe today. And then I've got my school and my class number and name and my instructor's name and the date. And then on page 2, I'm going to repeat my title, word for word, make it exact. Some of you might be wondering if I need anything up in the header, like a running head over here or my last name next to the page number. I don't need any of that for APA 7th edition. So as long as you're using one of the templates that I've provided you with, then all you'll need is that page number in the upper right, and you will be all set. So maybe I might talk about, I'm thinking for this speech, I'm going to talk about ethos first. I'm going to talk about pathos, and then I think I'm going to save logos. There's a lot of logos. Like, he uses a ton of facts and information in the essay. This is a good time for me to also maybe point out, I love this essay. It's one of my favorites. You don't have to love this essay. You don't have to love anything about it. You don't have to write this essay about this speech. I just kind of want to make sure that you guys know that the beauty of this speech, and there are many, many things, but this speech itself as a speech, as a piece of rhetoric, as something that is written to a hostile audience that is literally about to kill the man delivering the speech, it's technically amazing. All right, so I think I'm going to talk about ethos first, then pathos, then logos, then my conclusion. So my thesis statement is going to be something like, okay. Something that you are going to want to note about any type of literary analysis. If you are reviewing a specific piece of literature, and in this case, we're reviewing a specific speech, but it could be any reading assignment, whatever it may be. When it's a specific article, story, book, whatever it may be, always include the author's full name, the date, and the full title in the introduction and in the conclusion. You never need to list the year or the title again outside of the intro and conclusion, but you are going to list them in both places. Now, I like the conclusion to start with the thesis statement word for word. So you have permission from me to just go ahead and write a good 3-part thesis. And let me show you. See, I've got my 3 parts. Ethos, pathos, and logos, and they all connect very cleanly to these headers. And that's how we want to do it. We want, in our thesis, we want to say, I'm going to talk about A, B, C, and you could have D, E, F, G, H, I, J. And then you want to lay out those body paragraphs with those labels. And if you're seeing this, you're like, oh, that's so nice. That's the benefit of APA. That's really one of the best things that I like about it. I have a heck of a time staying organized and focused while I'm writing. I guess I had a tough time staying focused and organized while I was writing. Once I started using APA, like building these layers in, these labels in, and MLA has this too, but I don't know, there's something about the bold centered way that we do an APA document that just makes sense to me, as well as almost every other major that you might be majoring in. Okay, I digress. I would encourage you to just go ahead and take your 3-part thesis, make it the last sentence of your intro, and make it the very first sentence of your conclusion, word for word. I do not need you to change it. Only English teachers would probably want you to change it. Everyone else would be like, oh, you've got the tell-ems. We're going to tell them what we're going to tell them, and we're going to tell them, then we're going to tell them what we just told them. And as long as you're kind of doing that in a pretty formulaic way, then it's going to work. So now that I kind of have a foundation here, and I've some of this is just template directions, now I can start taking, maybe I printed my document, maybe I have all of my ethos sections are highlighted in blue, then I can start kind of bringing those into this paragraph. And maybe I want to bring in 2 to 3 examples and say, this is the quote, or this is the example, this is how it's ethos, and this is how effective it is. So when Malcolm X brings up, when he brings up freedom, and he brings up freedom in many ways, and it's such a key theme, and he brings up, there's this line when he says, you're duped, you're all duped, double duped, and to me, that gets me going, and so that's pathos for me. You know, when he starts to kind of neg me as the audience member, I start to feel, yeah, he's right, I'm feeling duped. I'm feeling taken advantage of. And so you could say, you know, with this quote, this is how the audience is feeling. And I'll say that if you listen to it, then you will hear different things than if you just read it. I cannot recommend listening to it enough, especially that version with the annotations. It's very powerful and something I hope that you'll consider taking another hour of your time to review. So this is kind of how you might want to start your rhetorical analysis. We also have another rhetorical analysis in looking at a modest proposal, something that is very, very different, something that is meant to be humorous and satirical, even though it's actually the most horrific thing you can even imagine. Some of us might not want to read that one. Like I said, it's a little horrific. Now, let's say that you didn't want to do a rhetorical analysis of the ballot or the bullet, and you're thinking to yourself, oh, I want to do one of these short essays, and I love this speech, but I'm not, the ethos, pathos, logos thing, not for me. You could write any kind of analysis of this speech, fixating on any specific element of it, and I would be very interested to read that, especially if you wanted to share your own opinions and feelings, whatever those may look like. I would be thrilled to just kind of hear your reactions. You might even take that a step further with the creative prompt, and you may choose to give your own speech in the style of Malcolm X's. So I want you to think like you were just in a club and you had to leave the club, and they decided they were going to try to kill you for leaving the club, but you still had something that you wanted to say. And so, gosh darn it, you're going to say it. And what is that going to look like? What do you have to say? I think it kind of goes back to something that Plato always makes me think about, which is, if we know truth, we have to promote it even if the consequence is death. So if you were going to take this and do the creative element of it, you would have to claim something that you're willing to die for. And that's tough. There's not a lot that we feel so strongly about in our kind of current contemporary society. So these are many things for all of you to think about. I hope that this video has helped to shed some light on who Malcolm X was, a little bit about his kind of life and struggles and successes, as well as how to kind of set up a rhetorical analysis, identify some different types of evidence, and also possibly do something a little more creative. Now, if you're a little unclear on ethos, pathos, and logos and examples and things like that, feel free to go back to the last few weeks of videos. They're all posted, and hopefully those will help to kind of give some good ideas as well. If you need anything, shoot me an email, schedule a Zoom, and happy reading.